Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descendant life forms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches are a pretty neat idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution.
Hey, Bryan, what's this?
Well, Jeff, this is our discussion of Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, the BBC audio production.
Yes, it is. And this would be then the follow-up to the Dirk Gently. This would be like their season 2.
Right.
And if you remember when we were talking about this book, we both kind of had no idea why they had this little part in it with this kid who was beating somebody up for turning off the TV.
Right.
And then it eventually dawned on us that it was because it was playing the commercial that became important to the plot.
That's correct. That's correct.
Because advertising plays such a part, every episode of this series has some kind of commercial attached to it.
It does. And before we get involved with the story, I just have some observations that I really wanted to make. I know you were a little disappointed that I didn't want to record the first time we were ready to record because I felt like I needed some more time to absorb the material. Right. And it turns out that I really did.
Okay.
And here's what I want to say. First off, again, our friend Dirk Maggs, I think, can be credited for some of this. I'm just assuming it's him because he seems to be the one thing that ties all these things together. But if you remember correctly, I believe that I made a comment at one point about how this would have been a much more enjoyable story if Richard and Susan had played a part in it.
Right.
And in the book, they don't. But here in the audio, I'm sure you were going to point out many times that they actually do.
They do.
And in fact, what I really wanted to kind of say about that is I almost get the impression, and this is really my gut feeling, is that this audio drama, the way that BBC has put it together, and I'm going to, again, credit Dirk Maggs, really seems to be the book that should have been written.
Right, yes.
You know, because the interconnectivity of all of the things that they've added to this audio drama really makes me enjoy this story a lot more.
I agree.
And here's the paradox that I was struggling with when we first started talking about recording this. I don't like this story.
Well, we kind of discussed that during the book, where it's not really something that's an enjoyable story, and as you then just pointed out now, it wasn't enjoyably told.
No.
So there was nothing you could enjoy about it.
Right, exactly. So this audio book is much better, in my opinion, than the original story, which seems odd because, you know, we talked a lot about how the voice of the author is within the writing and how you can hear the story through his telling of the different pieces and parts of it. But here again, I think the culmination and the continuity that they put into this story on their own really added a level that made the story more enjoyable. But what I thought about and what was bothering me so much is the title. I was like, why is this the Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul? Okay.
Well, because it was in the Hitchhiker's book and he hasn't used it yet as a title.
Brilliant. But here's what I got out of the story. And that is,
you have a reason that this title fits?
Yeah, I kind of do. And it's not his intention, I'm sure. Okay. It's my interpretation. obviously tea time is like 4:00 in the afternoon. They make high tea and they serve biscuits or cookies or whatever they call that. And he's talked in different episodes about how that mid-afternoon Sunday evening or whatever it is such a long, dreary, dull part of the life that he just can't get over. But this whole story represents a very, very negative view of humanity, and obviously, him being an atheist, of gods and God figures, especially about gods and God figures, which I thought, it's funny because I don't get that feeling when I read Hitchhikers, and I don't get that feeling even when I read Dirk, the original Dirk story. But I do here I see a lot of, I want to call it pent up anger in this story about humanity and gods,
and advertising.
And advertising.
Like advertising is the devil.
Oh yeah. And what's funny, because I was thinking about that too, and I was like, well, why is it that I don't really like the way he represents gods? And I thought, well, what other story has a good representation of the way gods might exist in the world? And I was thinking that would be, hold on.
The Bible?
No. Well, I did want to talk about the Bible, but that's a little different part of the story. The story that I was thinking about was Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Oh, right.
Have you read that book?
I have not. I've heard of it. It's kind of like on my list, but I keep forgetting about it. And
right.
Time.
And we know that Neil Gaiman is responsible for Good Omens. And so you get an idea of what he thinks about gods in those stories. But in the American Gods story, the gods only exist for as long as there are worshipers or people that worship those individual gods.
Okay. And
they kind of make that sort of implication here in this story too. But what is interesting about the gods in Gaiman's story is that they continue to exist and live in the world that we live in. So they adjust like you would expect human beings in normal positions, conditions to be. They continue to exist, and they live out their immortal lives as shadow human beings, essentially. Here, Adams, for me, creates the gods, and they never change. They're immutable.
Right.
As they originally were brought into existence, that's all they're capable of doing, which is very cynical, in my opinion, because to me, that means he doesn't believe people can change. He doesn't believe that there's any movement within the realm of personality and type, which is funny to me because he's constantly talking about the various ways people look at life and such in Hitchhiker's Guide. So it doesn't jive well with me. So I kind of want to say I could see where this was written in a part of his life where he wasn't feeling too good about life.
No, I agree.
That's kind of what I was absorbing while I was trying to re-listen to this story. But I'm looking forward to our discussion of it now. So let's dig in.
Okay. Well, in part 1, for me, it starts out really strong.
Mm-hmm.
We need to know that business has been slow for Dirk. And what we hear is a phone ringing while Dirk is sorting through his junk mail. And he finds one from Charity.
Right.
And I kind of laughed at this bit because he was so happy that he got this envelope because it meant there was going to be a free pen inside with his business name on it. And he was going to be able to do Saturday's crossword puzzle.
Right, exactly.
So he calls out to Miss Pierce about the phone, and she tells him that it has not rung for so long that she forgot what to do with it. So when Miss Pierce finally answers the phone, like in the first series, she answers with the name of the agency and says they solve the whole crime and they find the whole person. And in this one, she added finding the whole cat. And she is also putting out an ad for her replacement.
Right.
And she starts her new job on Monday with British Airways.
Right.
So they're letting you know right away where all these people are going to be. And that's, I think, why I enjoyed this a lot more than the book, because there wasn't mystery of what's happening.
Exactly.
Just lay it out.
Exactly. And yeah, I like that part about it. But Dirk clearly knows that Miss Pierce is going to start working for British Airways on Monday.
Yes.
So he's not really surprised by all the events that happen at the airport, or he knows who the persons are at the airport through his association with her.
Well, we also learned through the phone that Dirk's cleaning lady is unhappy, and he wants to know if she cleaned the refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk goes out and doesn't buy a newspaper, but takes one on a short-term loan. So I think that was kind of funny. And when this first came out, I guess I wonder how many people tried to do that trick to the poor guy at the newsstand.
Oh, I don't know.
So they put the ad for Hades. They dropped the S. So it's not Shades that turns into Hades in the commercial, because that would have been a bit difficult to show a visual turning of a can in an audio production.
Mm-hmm.
And we listened to Odin at the ad agency where they're playing it for him. And Odin is trying to become a spokesperson, but he keeps falling asleep.
Right.
And Torag is negotiating for him with the Dracots.
That's right.
Then we get to hear the incident where Thor changes the fighter jet into an eagle.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't just a story about a missing plane. We get to hear the whole interaction.
Right. Which is good. I mean, I like the way they portrayed that whole scene.
Yeah. Again, there was a lot of things that he kept us in the dark about that he didn't need to in the book.
Right.
So they just put him right out there now because it makes it... I don't know how to put this. I like it better when you feel you're in on the joke from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Than when the whole thing's laid out that you don't understand.
Right.
And then it's revealed.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one of my problems with the Dirk Gently series, and when I was talking to my sister about the Hitchhiker series, one of the things that kind of got on her nerves is she kept wanting to say, yeah, we know you're funny. Yeah, we know you're funny. And I never got that from the Hitchhikers. I always enjoyed all of the funny and the comedy.
Right.
But with this, I keep going, yeah, we know you're smart. Yeah, we know you're smart. Sometimes I feel that these stories, or his book version at least, is talking over me.
Right.
And like the first one where you need to have a good knowledge of
17th
English
century
literature.
English literature, exactly. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's funny too, because they talk more in the audio drama here with Rag or Torag, and you get to understand in that interaction that's happening between him and the Dracots how he in fact is manipulating the situation to his own advantage.
Of course.
He talks about how he wants Odin to have blonde, pigtailed caretakers for Odin. You know, it's evident in that conversation that Torag is pulling the strings here much more than you feel like he is in the book. Right.
But the Dracots are going right along with it because they believe they're getting way more than they have to give out.
Exactly.
So Mr. Anstey arrives at Dirk's office, and he says he's being followed by a goblin and a hairy, green-eyed monster with a scythe who nobody else can see. He is a record company executive, so I think it was pretty clever that they made this change because it simplifies the story, and they were still able to work in later, as we'll see, that Richard wrote the song.
Right.
And then they jump to the airport, and Richard is on his way to San Francisco, and he yells to Miss Pierce, asked about her career change, and where Dirk was.
Right.
And this, in a nutshell, explained everything we needed to know about who was behind the British Airways desk.
Right, exactly. And that's another one of those pieces. And we like the tie-in with Richard, and he mentions, of course, they talk about Kate and Susan.
Right.
At this point.
Yes. So after Richard leaves, Miss Pierce is assisting a gentleman who is going to Oslo who is carrying a hammer. Richard continued on the airport and he meets a woman named Kit and asked if she was chasing a story. Also expressed his condolences about Luke, who dies in a bizarre taxi-hailing accident.
Mm-hmm.
She is on her way to Oslo to meet John Philippe. However, she fully expects him to be called away on business and not be there.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of interesting that Richard seems to know Kate, but calls her Kit.
Yes.
So there's this, is this who we think it is, or is it somebody else?
Right.
We find out that it is going to be Kate.
Right.
But she gets called Kit right at the beginning.
It's weird.
And then here's some more explanation to fill us in on everything that happened since the first series. He explains that Susan took over the company after Gordon's death. Their differences of opinion on the direction of the company caused them to break up, and Susan sold the company to Sirius Cybernetics.
Right, exactly. And in that conversation, they talk about the program that Richard's been working on called Reason, which is the program that allows you to enter the answer that you're looking for, and then this program will find a good reason for it.
Correct. Tell them what you want to do, and it will tell you why you want to do it, or why you should do it.
Exactly. But then, of course, what do we get? We get Sirius Cybernetics, which is obviously from Hitchhiker's Guide. And we really enjoy that. And at one point, Richard is being flagged down by some scurvy-looking gentlemen in dark glasses. Right. And as they approach Richard, they say, "Resistance is useless."
Right. Right.
And they drag Richard off.
Right. The program called Reason so perfectly fits into the type of a program that Sirius Cybernetics would create.
Mm-hmm.
So then, again, we learn that Kit is Kate Schechter, and she is desperately trying to get to Oslo, but the gentleman in front of her is a difficult customer, and there is an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
The widow of the missing fighter pilot goes to Dirk, who is posing as an old gypsy palm reader. He tells her she will be coming into some money. Mr. Anstey comes back to Dirk and thinks he knows what's up with the hot potato he has and the goblin and the monster. He told Dirk he would pay $300 and see him in the morning at 6:30. Dirk said that was too early, so Anstey paid $350.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I love this. During this interaction, at one point, Dirk says, "Boy, I'd sell my soul for a pizza box with just a piece of crust in it."
Yeah.
Which, of course, is a reference to your book, where they talk about the pizza that exists where he doesn't know where it comes from.
Right, right. So Kate is in the hospital sharing a room with Thor. And Torag is in there and told Kate that his name was Nurse Sally Mills. And he also told her that the drink machine was faulty and she shouldn't try to buy a drink from it.
Right.
But she was thirsty, so she tried to. And the machine said it was not a drinks machine and that she needed help. So there was no personality of the drinks machine in the book.
No, absolutely not. And this, every interaction anybody has with the drinks machine, it's an interaction with Miss Pierce, and it's a pretty funny one.
Right.
As you can possibly imagine.
So, of course, Dirk oversleeps, and he went down for breakfast and argued with his cleaning lady, and she wants to be paid. He checks his voicemail, and he hears a frantic message from Mr. Anstey. So then there's a big change from the book, I believe, because I guess I want to say we don't ever hear from the cleaning lady again, but it's never explained what happened to the cleaning lady.
Right.
But in this, Dirk finally gets his cleaning lady to clean the refrigerator, and when she opens the door, it eats her.
Right. 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 And in the book, I think it does say that she gets consumed by the refrigerator. But what's weird about this interaction, and this is what bothered me, one of the things that bothered me about the audiobook, I know they have to put it in some kind of sequential order, but in the book, we're clearly led to believe that Dirk's guilt and his possession of this refrigerator become intertwined, where this refrigerator takes on a godlike character or mystical powers and becomes a creature of guilt and devours his cleaning lady, and then gets separated from reality and is in the spirit world, which is where we find it later in the story, or in a rubbish bin in Valhalla, or the other world.
Right.
But what I don't like is they haven't really established Dirk feeling guilty about anything before she's already eaten by the refrigerator. So the refrigerator didn't have any motivation at that moment, but he ate her anyway.
Right.
A little out of context, if you ask me.
Yes.
It hit me in the book, but I really didn't think too much about it. I let it slide. But even in the audio play here, they let this happen, and it kind of irks me. and that is that they let Torag lift the hammer and carry the hammer around.
Right.
And that's always, of course, bothered me, because the legend is that only Thor can lift his hammer, or a worthy individual, as we know Captain America is.
Yes. But
Torag would not fit within that category in any form or fashion. So that's always bothered me about this, both the book and this audio story. Torag carries it around like it's nothing, you know? Well, he complains a little bit because he has to, but anyway, we'll let that slide.
Right. So when Dirk arrives at Anstey's house, in the book, Constable Luke was given a description of Dirk, and he recognized him by it.
Right.
They did the same here and called back the Fat Doctor Who reference.
Yes, exactly.
And that makes me wonder if Douglas Adams told his friends that was how he pictured Dirk, and that's why it's in here.
I would believe so. That makes perfect sense.
Dirk spells out his method of navigation, and they mentioned that they sent Big Bob the Finder for him.
Mm-hmm.
Inside the house, the scene is as it is in the book, including the show-off suicide and Dirk being tasked with coming up with a plausible explanation for it.
Mm-hmm.
They jump to the hospital. A commercial is playing on the radio. Kate is talking to the real Nurse Sally Mills, telling her about the goblin and asking about Thor. In a slight change from the book, Kate asked if she could get a pizza and was denied because of the hospital's healthy eating policy. So times have changed, and the no delivery joke doesn't work anymore.
That's right. Healthy eating? Oh, well, that still works.
The penguin joke is one of my favorite jokes. Mm-hmm. However, outside of being a joke, I don't believe it's very relevant at all to the story.
No.
And so I was surprised it was kept in.
Mm-hmm.
And I like when a story can poke fun at itself. Then, since we know that even the author has problems with it, it's easier to let it go.
Right.
So this is where we hear Torag say something about it being impossible that a 3-foot goblin is tasked with dragging Thor and a drinks machine up 6 flights of stairs. But here he is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was kind of funny.
That reminded me of King Kong,
mm-hmm.
the movie King Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple different versions of King Kong, actually. The one that I think of the most is the one with Jessica Lange and, who is it? Kurt Russell?
Yeah, Kurt Russell.
So they're on this island. They dig this huge pit. They fill it with this knockout gas. They cover it with leaves. King Kong doesn't see it. Falls into the pit. Gets knocked out. Cut. Next scene. He's in the cargo hold of a ship. How? How did they get
apparently
giant unconscious gorilla out of a pit in the middle of a jungle?
They just called Toe Rag, and he just grabbed an ankle and pulled him out.
That's what they did.
Although the funny thing that I know you're a fan of the Godzilla and the these kind of movies, so am I really.
Right.
What I always get a kick out of, even in Marvel with the Hulk, and I guess I can excuse the Hulk a little bit, but they're always this imagination of scale. The creatures get bigger and smaller and smaller and bigger, and depending on which creature they're actually fighting. It always kind of blows my mind. That at one scene it looks like he's an 8-foot gorilla, and the next scene it looks like he's an 80-foot gorilla.
Right, and the same gorilla that stood toe to toe with Godzilla, towering over the city. Climbed the Empire State Building.
Exactly. Yeah, because in the Empire State Building, I mean, if you like that original version, which I do, he looks like he might be, I don't know, maybe 10 stories tall, like 50 feet tall or 60 feet tall or something like that, because he's up on the top and waving his arms around. He's not... But his scale doesn't change that much in that original movie. No.
But what I'm saying is that in order for him to fight Godzilla a few years later,
right, he has to be 10 times larger.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. And the Hulk does that a lot too, which drives me insane.
So up at the top of the stairs, Toe Rag attempts to nail Thor to the floor. But he couldn't because Thor is wearing chainmail.
Which I think is a funny scene. Because it sounds like he's using like an air gun, with nail.
Yeah.
He's trying an air gun and he keeps hitting the chainmail.
Right.
Then he goes to plan B and glues him to the floor.
Right.
With hundreds of little bottles of super glue.
So they jump back to Anstey's house. And Dirk is trying to talk himself into believing that Anstey's death was not his fault.
Mm-hmm.
Then he's called to through the hedge by Mrs. Draycott, who did not realize that Anstey was dead, but just wanted the record turned off. So we jump over to Odin, who is going on about fresh linen and quilted toilet paper to Sister Bailey. He is also talking about the incident at the airport and wondering what Toe Rag did with Thor.
Mm-hmm.
And then back at Anstey's, Dirk and Constable Luke are in the basement. Dirk looks at the gold record on the wall, and when he touches it, something falls to the floor. Luke asked if it fell out of the frame, but Dirk said it fell out of his pocket. So I thought that was pretty slick.
Yep.
So Dirk notices Richard has writing credits, and Dirk was able to hear a kid watching TV all the way upstairs on the second floor from the basement.
Mm-hmm.
So he had the TV on pretty loud then.
That's right.
So they go up to see him, and the Hades commercial is on TV, and Dirk turns off the TV and pays for it.
Right.
The kid turns the TV back on, and there is a news bulletin mentioning Miss Pierce being missing from the airport and the whole incident being called an act of God. We jump to Kate on the phone with Jean-Philippe, who is in Oslo. Kate tells him why she did not make it and that she is going to do an interview at Woods Head.
Right.
So in the book, do we ever learn Jean-Philippe made it to Oslo?
Nope, we never did.
I didn't think so.
Nope.
I didn't think we just heard his name that one time and never again.
Right, exactly.
So in here they point out that the one time he does show up is the time she missed.
Poetic justice.
So back at Anstey's, Jilks is talking to the Draycotts, and Dirk is giving his evaluation of the suicide method, unless, of course, it was a deal with the devil.
Which is an important little line that they add here.
Yes.
And if it's okay, then we can bring in the fact that at this point, they're going to begin to allude, and it's... I don't know if you got this impression at all in the book. I certainly didn't. But Near the beginning, you discuss the commercial with Hades, and it's supposed to be a representation or an actor playing Satan, or the devil, okay? Here, they start to draw a parallel, or they imply that it was the real devil, not an actor, and the Draycots didn't really know that, and Torag is actually an agent of Hades, or the devil.
Right.
So his motivation is deeper and more suspect than we even imagine in the book at all, because I don't recall any kind of association between the devil and Torag.
No.
At least not to the point where it became evident. But I like this because it helps me understand the motivation, because I always wondered, what the heck is Torag getting out of this?
Right.
He's a toady for Odin, doing Odin's bidding, including fluffing his pillows. So why would he go to any trouble to make this whole thing happen? But this part where they tie it together starts to, as we were saying earlier, knit this whole story together better.
Right. So we get another update as Dirk cons himself another newspaper and then gets attacked by an eagle. And that brings us to episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
Thor wakes up and he is upset that hundreds of tubes of superglue were used to secure him to the floor. Dirk is looking for his cleaning lady, goes to a pawn shop, and it has his pink binoculars in the window.
Mm-hmm.
He decides to buy a new refrigerator, finds a calculator that makes the same noise as the guide.
Mm-hmm.
We go back and Thor's cutting himself out of the floor with the hammer, the way he did in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And Thor tells Torag that he challenges Odin. And in case it was not obvious before, we are told with perfect certainty that the drinks machine is Miss Pierce.
Oh, gosh.
So we hear the Draycots and Torag argue about Torag not being able to get Thor to agree to a commercial.
Mm-hmm.
And the Draycots were told about the challenge and are going to Asgard. Kate is going to Woodshead to interview the head of the hospital. She says they are in the business of giving scholarships to patients with particularly gifted diseases. He is going to take her to see some gifted patients. So Dirk goes to a coffee shop and meets Nurse Sally Mills. She helps him straighten his broken nose. Here, he tells her about the I Ching calculator and that it is a device to help you make decisions. Since his horoscope by his nemesis said all of his decisions today would be wrong, he decided to get the I Ching to do it.
Right.
So, it was not spelled out so succinctly in the book.
No, it wasn't.
But he did use it to help him decide if he should buy a new refrigerator.
Right. And I did think it was funny here. And again, I don't remember this from the book, but maybe it was there. Sally's birthday is in the same zodiac period as Dirk's.
Right.
And the other thing that I thought was interesting about the I Ching calculator, and I didn't say anything about it in our last discussion, but I really thought this was cute and the kind of joke that Adams would make that isn't apparent unless you think hard about it. And that is that he indicates that the I Ching calculator will not calculate anything above 4.
Right.
And when I was thinking about that, I'm like, well, why would that be important? And then I thought about it and I thought to myself, that means that pi, 3.14, etc.,
Right.
is within the ability of that calculator. So all the circular logic you could possibly ever need is contained within the programming of the calculator, but nothing beyond that.
Right.
Which is reiterated later in the story when they talk about the Sirius Cybernetic Company owning the company that made the I Ching calculator, and the Reason software is housed or partially within this calculator.
Yes. But what I found odd was in the last book or radio play, Dirk just went through this whole business with the electric monk who helped a being make a decision by believing what he wanted him to believe. And now Dirk is trusting another apparatus to make decisions for him. It's like, didn't you learn your lesson?
No, he clearly has not learned any lesson. And this is the other thing that we talked about before. I love the story. I do like the story of Dirk as a concept, but Dirk as an individual is not a very likable character.
No. So Dirk is at a coffee shop and he's looking for a knife to open the envelope with a lot of crossed out names. Kate, on her tour in the hospital, meets the reciter of yesterday's stock market prices and the man who channels Dustin Hoffman. And they said it in the book and they said it here again. They figured out that he says what Hoffman is going to say moments before Hoffman says it from watching a talk show.
Right.
This didn't dawn on me reading the book, but haven't they heard of the 7-second delay?
Well, clearly, and even more than that, actually. So I don't know how they came up with the calculation of when it occurs,
Right.
Because I thought that same thing, because he would have been repeating it or saying it at a much different time. So
yes, even if it was a 7-second delay, he would have said it 7 seconds, and 6 seconds later she'd have said it, and then he'd have said it on the TV.
Right.
So it wasn't just before he said it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless moments meant a minute.
Right.
Who knows?
But even at that, talk shows are pre-recorded. They're never live like that. I mean, maybe the news, but even the news is mostly pre-recorded.
Right. Vast majority are. I mean,
yeah.
In the United States, late at night is Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Right. But it's recorded at like 4 p.m,
Well, no, to be live in Los Angeles, it's on at 8 o'clock.
Oh, you're right. Yep.
So or 8:30. So it's it is early in Los Angeles because I'm believing it's live, just because I believe everything I read.
Oh, I absolutely love it. But you know what? The more I thought about it, what was the point of all that Woods Head stuff?
I don't know. I really don't know. It was because he had some jokes about people with these strange abilities that he wanted to put in.
I guess. Okay, I'll give him that. It definitely was an aside. Oh, by the way, this is happening over here.
Right. Meanwhile...
I love it, just like Batman.
Yeah. So Dirk is explaining all the mysteries of today and learns that Nurse Sally Mills treated 2 of the victims from the explosion at the airport where Miss Pierce disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
They shoehorned in Sally's book by Howard Bell and giving it to Dirk and Bell's name being on the envelope. I mean, they just, they weren't very smooth about working that in. They just sort of crammed it in there. Back at the hospital, Kate meets a medium and takes dictation from dead physicists. The information is likely to provide a grand unified field theory of everything.
Right.
I didn't point this out in the book, but I liked it, so I want to get it in here. Mm-hmm. The doctor says, now this produces a very interesting, not to say somewhat embarrassing situation for scientists, because the means by which the information is reaching us seems to be completely contrary to the meaning of the information.
Yeah, that's I like that. That's good.
So I thought that was funny.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Kate tells her Uncle Henry joke.
Right.
And she chastises the doctor because he only keeps patients that will turn a profit. She was told this was not a charity. She runs into Odin and Torag on the way out, and they are discussing the contract and the challenge.
Right. Now, in the book, do we get information that says the Draycotts own Woods Head?
No, I don't believe no.
I didn't think so, but here in the audio book, they say that, well, major contributor is the way that they're described.
Oh, okay, yes.
So that's another little added thing, trying to tie all these pieces together.
Right. So Dirk is on the road, and he passes the van with Odin and Torag, and he picks a car to follow. On the radio, there is an ad for the Fjord Focus.
I love that. I got a Fjord Focus. Actually, I got a Fjord Fusion, but I was looking at a Focus.
You were looking at
nice
the
car.
Yes. So Kate stops her car, and she gets run into by Dirk.
Fjord Focus.
Part 4. Dirk has to explain his navigation technique to Kate to explain why he was following her. Then he gets a phone call from the guy he bought the refrigerator from. He is asked where to dump it, and Dirk says somewhere not connected to him, so they dump it outside his gate.
Exactly.
As a joke, we get to hear Dirk's cleaning lady asking to be let out because of the cold, not the lack of oxygen. So Dirk and Kate go to a cafe and talk while they wait for a mechanic to fix the car. Dirk figures out who she is, and she is angry because it keeps happening. So like in the book, everybody knows who she is without her having to tell them.
I do like that part because, the deductive reasoning is all there, and it was pretty clean and nicely portrayed. And I do want to say that on top of everything, BBC does an excellent job with their audio books and plays.
Yes, they do. So Neil Sharp, a music arranger who does jingles for the Draycotts, was formerly the bass player with Pugilism and the Third Autistic Cuckoo. He gets a call from Mrs. Draycott. Here he gets to mention her and congratulate her for her rapid success in the ad business.
Mm-hmm.
He also mentions that he has not received any royalties from the first release of Hot Potato, and now it is being re-released.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not only breaking from the book, but from the previous series.
Correct.
So he told Mrs. Draycott that Richard was the keyboard player for Pugilism when he was in the Reasonably Good Band. So keeping true to style, they are contradicting themselves.
Yes. But again, I just think that's interesting that they pulled them all in there. And it was one way to keep Richard in the story,
Yes. They jump back to Dirk and Kate, and we learn that Neil Sharp is her landlord. They scan the names on the envelope, and Kate mentions there is a lot of interconnectedness happening around here. And the mechanic pulled up with Kate's car.
Mm-hmm.
Back at Neil's, Thor knocks on his door looking for Kate, and he leaves a drink machine in the hall. Back with Dirk and Kate, the car is fixed, and Kate leaves. And we jump to Howard Bell and his chickens.
Oh, yes. But one thing that you didn't mention is that when Mrs. Draycott is on the phone with the bass player, she's trying to curse him. She's trying to turn him into something.
Oh, yes, yes. She's trying to use her god powers.
Yeah, her god powers to trying to turn him into something. And it's not working. So
No. So when we jump back to Howard Bell and his chickens, Howard doesn't make an actual appearance in the book. He is only mentioned. No. But here he's an actual character.
Right.
And he's on the phone, and gradually he does get turned into a chicken. So she got it to work after all.
Yes.
And so now we're in the van with Torag and Odin on their way to Asgard.
Mm-hmm.
And Odin could tell that his power has been used when Mrs. Draycott cursed the writer.
Right.
So Kate gets home, and as she walks to her apartment, the lights are going out. She is spooked. She meets Thor. He wants help getting the floorboards off his back. And then they are attacked by an eagle, and he tells the eagle he can do nothing for it, but his wife has been provided for. We can hear Dirk and Richard on the phone. From Dirk's perspective, and on the phone in the background there is a moan. Dirk asked if Richard was all right. He said yes, and that wasn't him. And who was that?
Oh, that was our buddy.
Yes, Marvin was in the background.
Yes. And what's implied here, which is glorious as well, is that here he is now. Richard is working with Sirius Cybernetics.
Yes.
And they are still working on the Reason software. And what's implied, I guess, in this particular story, which is one of the reasons why I really like it, is that that's Marvin's origin.
Right.
His origin software is this software that Richard is creating called Reason. Which is brilliant. And, I think that had he been alive, Adams would have thought that was a really good touch.
Yes, he would. So now we hear Neil scolding Kate and Thor for being inconsiderate, since he was trying to write a jingle channeling what it was like to stand before Thor, the god of thunder. He should be thanking them.
Yes. and isn't that the other thing? And of course they talk about it here in the book and in this audio book. They talk about this SEP, someone else's problem field. And it's not like Thor and Odin are going around calling themselves anything other than Thor and Odin. And if you're standing in line with a large Nordic individual who calls himself Thor, wouldn't you be thinking about the god? Like, I'm not sure it would take very large steps of the imagination for you to try and draw those two together.
Right. So we hear more of the phone conversation, but this time it's from Richard's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn that it definitely is Marvin.
Right.
And being distracted, Dirk crashes into the Draycots.
Mm-hmm.
They yell at him for that, for dumping the refrigerator outside the gate, and for having an eagle in his yard. All right, part 5. This starts out with Odin arriving at Valhalla for the challenging hour.
Mm-hmm.
Dirk calls Kate to ask about eagles, and she hangs up on him.
Mm-hmm.
But before she hangs up, we hear her call to Thor.
Right.
And this has to have been done as some sort of previously on reminder.
Right.
So Dirk fights then with the eagle that's in his house.
Mm-hmm.
Back at Valhalla, Odin is trying to get the Asgard gods to accept the fact that they are no longer needed by humans. When they find out that Odin has surrendered his powers, not to a king or Mother Teresa, but to a lawyer and his wife who was in advertising, they go from chanting his name to chanting Thor's name. So Thor is tearing up Kate's apartment and she is angry. He wants to tend to the wounds from the eagle. She offers the antiseptic. He tells her she knows nothing. She gets more upset and says, "Of course I don't. I am only human and a woman and American." While technically true, in the book she is described as having lived all around the world, but at heart she is a true New Yorker. A little more specific than an American.
Right, exactly. So it didn't bother you that the audience at the hall was really Thor about that?
I'm going to edit that out.
No, you have to leave it in.
So the Draycots are using Odin's powers to flag down a cop and it's Constable Luke, who they use as a taxi service.
Mm-hmm.
So we jump to Kate drawing a bath for Thor with all kinds of products. While he's in the bath, we hear Kate on her computer doing a search of Thor.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a missed opportunity because it comes from Ian Colfer's book, but I really would have found it funny if she would have found the viral video Zaphod made of Thor being the Backstreet Deviant.
Oh, yeah. That would have been funny.
But that had been calling to a different property, and
right,
I understand why they didn't. But
Right.
It's out there.
Right.
Should be fair game.
There you go.
So Dirk calls Kate again and talks about the eagle in his house and how he has escaped it by taking refuge in the kitchen. He mentions the circles on the wings. Kate says that she and Thor dealt with the same eagle. Dirk mentions to her that he had difficulty opening the envelope because the men who delivered his refrigerator took things, including his knives and possibly his cleaning lady. In the envelope was a legal document written in runic script. Looks like a bill and is signed in blood. Dirk is jumping out his kitchen window to follow the Draycots. Outside, he meets a gentleman who wants to bum a cigarette, who is going to the same train station he is heading to.
Right.
He tried to call his cleaning lady, can hear her phone, but does not try to locate where the sound is coming from.
Yep. I thought it was funny because even in the outro of this particular episode, they talk about that character that's bumming a cigarette as the mysterious man.
Yes.
But he's clearly a god. At least he goes to the meeting in Valhalla.
It's the Owa guy, and it's his...
Owa guy. Yeah, except he doesn't do the Owa.
They really ruin it.
Yeah, I know. He doesn't do one Owa.
He says it once.
Oh, does he? Okay.
He does say it once, and it's not done correctly.
Right. Right.
I think it was more of an exclamation, like something happened, and he goes, "Oh, ah," as opposed to going, "Oh, ah." After his bath, Thor tells Kate about whales and counting rocks. He also explains that bad things happen when he gets angry, and that the drinks machine is the airport check-in girl, but does not know how to change anything back. He asks her to go to Asgard with him.
Right.
At the train station, Dirk notices it's full of homeless people. Kate and Dirk are on the phone again, and Kate explains the challenging hour to Dirk. Dirk mentions that the station is empty and he does not know where all the people went. Kate mentions slipping behind a molecule. Dirk watches the Draycots come in and vanish. So Thor is twirling his hammer and then snaps his fingers and they go to Thor's dimension. The garbage dumpster with the refrigerator was also there. And sometimes things slip between dimensions. They meet some Valkyries and then fly away. Dirk goes to the center of the station and tries to figure out how to slip dimensions and then just does it. All right. Anything to add about part 5?
No. I mean, when they're real similar, there's very little to say.
Part 6. We are at Valhalla for the challenging hour, and the crowd is chanting for Thor, which is giving Odin a migraine. Thor is called forward, but he's not there. Dirk is there, and is again fighting off an eagle. Dirk has a conversation with the homeless man who tried to bum a cigarette earlier. He is the Owa guy, and only says Owa once, and not as it is portrayed in the book.
Right.
He tells Dirk he has heard Valhalla is going to be shut down, and Odin sold all their powers. He explained a little about the last challenge that Thor ended up losing and having to do some counting penance. It sounds like the challenge is a debate more than a fight. So Thor takes Kate to the North Sea in his world and meets Sulawensis, who is about to kill herself. She shows them the knife she plans to use and how she will do it. Thor stops her. Sulawensis talks to Kate and explains how Kate's world affects theirs. So they do a weird twist here. The breach of contract in the book was a bit weird. But in this, it was because someone was killed and there was a no murder clause.
Right. I guess they were doing that to make it more understandable because it wasn't really clear in the book why there was a breach of contract.
Right, but the idea of the whole hot potato and selling your soul kind of means your end is coming. So the no murder clause was a little bit odd in reference to the blood contract.
You're right. It does get a little bit confusing because the contract that was signed in blood with Odin is in Norway, and we find that, later in the story here. But they're referencing that contract, but the document with the ruins on it is somehow Torag's bill for his services. But what I don't quite get is, why was it a hot potato, and why could it have been passed on? Why could that bill be allowed to be passed on? Because the Dracotts passed it on to someone else, and then they passed it on to someone else and someone else. So why was this bill, quote unquote, allowed to be passed on? And then the payment of the bill was the death of the last person who had it.
Right.
Doesn't make a lot of sense, because I don't quite get that part of it.
Right.
But anyway, the original contract is where they found the no murder clause, or no, whatever it was.
Right. So back at the North Sea, Thor loses his temper and releases some energy and steam. He goes in search of something before going to Valhalla. Earlier, Thor mentioned to Kate how humans do not actually see the gods walking around. Torag brags that he is visible, and they are all somebody else's problem. So they do right here call the SEP by name.
Right.
The Dracotts explain what the breach of contract was and the forfeit of Odin's powers because of it. They will no longer keep Odin in the comfort he has been enjoying. When Dirk asks for help, the Oa god finally says Oa correctly. Odin throws Torag and the monster out of Valhalla for their incompetence. Odin is confronted for selling out the Norse gods. He cares only for his linen and luxuries.
Right.
Now that Torag is gone, Dirk is acting for Odin. He meets with the Dracotts, and they fill him in on the contract specifics. After their conversation, Simon Dracott says, "And that just about wraps it up for the gods," which I thought was pretty funny.
Yep.
That is the title of Ulan Kalufit's book.
That about wraps it up for God, then.
The challenging hour is over, and Thor eventually arrives with the original contract. He tears up the contract, and Thor undoes all the unfortunate things that happened when he got angry. We jump to the Dracotts, who are on the way home, and they are in front of Dirk's house when the Eagle becomes a jet fighter again.
Poor Dirk.
Yes. And poor Dracotts, because that crash with a jet fighter in a BMW, not going to be much left. Dirk's phone rings, and his ringtone is Sharon and Joy. The call is from his cleaning lady, and she wants to be rescued from inside the refrigerator. He leaves with Miss Pierce and gets hit by a motorcycle. Torag and the monster find the refrigerator and are looking for food. They opened it and find the cleaning lady, who follows them looking for a job.
Which is weird. I guess what happens here in their world, now they're in Valhalla or whatever dimension that they happen to be in now, and she has taken on, I assume, they imply that she has become a god of guilt, and now she is attaching herself to Torag and the green hairy monster, and they will be guilty for the rest of their lives while she tags along with them forever. I thought it was a little odd that they did that, but...
Yeah. And of course, Dirk wants a newspaper, and he learns what happened to his house. So like we mentioned before, I think all of the little additions and tying together and bringing some things from the other books made this so much easier to follow.
It definitely did. Definitely did. Well, Jeff, I think we started off with the right attitude here, and I think you and I both agree that this audiobook, this BBC presentation, appears to be the story that should have been the book.
Right.
I would have definitely appreciated if Adams could have used this as an edit and rewritten his story. I think the story would have been a much stronger one. because he would have been able to incorporate some of these ideas in his own language, in the language that we're used to hearing. And in that, I think we would have found much more humor. But as I started off, I find this to be a very dark story because the characters and the gods do not grow. As defined by atoms, they don't have the capacity, which is really kind of a ridiculous assumption.
Right.
If you assume they're omnipresent and you assume they're omniscient, a few things that you would give to gods as their baseline powers, they would be flexible. They'd have to be flexible. They'd have to be able to learn. I don't like that part of this story. I don't like the parts that indicate that Thor is a bumbling idiot and he could never get out of the room without his shoes tied for him. That just doesn't work for me. It does that whole part of this story doesn't work, at least from my perspective. And I'm kind of glad I'm done with this story.
Yeah.
At least I hope I'm done with this story. I mean, we'll see. We might come back to it, right?
We might, yes. There are things in general about stories that I like and don't like. And one of the things that I don't like is when you really don't have a favorite character. When there's not anybody that you can like or relate to. There's no good guy who wins.
Right.
Yeah, some of the bad guys got what was coming to them, but in general, everybody just ended up where they were. And
absolutely, that's exactly the way I see this story. Even the way you described it, which I'm always amazed that you're able to go through these things and encapsulate the stories as you do. But here we are, we drop off and he's reading a newspaper about how his house is destroyed. I mean, yeah, that's it.
That's it. That's how it ends.
Ta-dum. It's like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. So Jeff, what's next?
Well, next, so Bryan, we are going to do the TV series, the first TV series the BBC did of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency.
Fantastic.
There is a pilot and then 3 episodes.
Very good. I like watching TV.
Yeah.
It'll be a nice break. Although, like I said, we've enjoyed the audiobooks, but this will be interesting.
Yes. So now that we know what we're doing next time, I think this is the end.
All right, Jeff, I got one for you. Are you ready? All right.
Yep.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Oh, boy. Did you hear about the guy that just got admitted to the emergency room?
I did not hear about the guy that just got admitted to the emergency room.
Yeah, he was admitted because they found 42 small plastic horses shoved up his rectum.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. But don't worry, his condition is considered stable.
Oh, wow. He worked in a 42.
Just for the episode, in case you want to put it in there somewhere.
Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea. And our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.